If you are hearing these words right now, this message is not random, and it is not for everyone. Most people will scroll past this moment without realizing what they just avoided. But if you ignore this completely, you will miss something that was never meant to be found by the unprepared. This is not a myth, not a fairy tale, and not a motivational fantasy. What you are about to hear is connected to a text that does not exist in libraries, does not appear in search engines, and does not reveal itself to those who are merely curious. It only appears to those who are ready, and readiness is not something you decide. It is something that happens to you. There is a reason ancient civilizations warned about knowledge arriving before its time. There is a reason certain names were erased instead of celebrated. And there is a reason the name Thoth still echoes through history like a signal waiting for the right receiver. Before we go any further, understand this. This story does not ask for belief. It asks for attention. And attention is the rarest currency left in the modern world. The first sign was not dramatic. No visions, no voices, no flashes of light. It was a delay, a hesitation in time so small it could be dismissed as distraction. 1 second stretched into something unfamiliar, like a breath held too long without realizing it. The man noticed it while staring at his phone screen, scrolling without reading, absorbing nothing, when suddenly the movement stopped feeling continuous. It wasn't frozen, it was segmented, as if reality had briefly revealed its frame rate. He blinked. Everything resumed, but the feeling stayed, a subtle pressure behind the eyes, a sense that something had just passed through him without leaving a name. That night, he dreamed of a book he could not open. It had no title on its cover, no language on its pages, only shifting symbols that rearranged themselves faster than thought. Each time he tried to focus, the text dissolved, not into nonsense, but into something almost familiar, like remembering a word from a language you never learned. When he woke up, the feeling did not leave. It followed him into the morning, into the noise of traffic, into conversations that felt rehearsed and hollow. People spoke, but their words landed late, like echoes catching up to their source. 3 days later he found the message. It did not arrive in his inbox or notifications. It appeared where nothing should have been, an empty document that opened itself on his laptop after a system update. No sender, no file history, just a single line of text waiting patiently, as if it had always been there and he had simply reached the moment he could see it. You are early, but not too early. He stared at it for a long time, heart steady, breath slow, more curious than afraid. Fear comes from surprise. This felt anticipated. When he moved the cursor, the line vanished and another replaced it. Thoth does not write for readers, he writes for receivers. He had heard the name before, of course. Everyone had in passing. An Egyptian god of wisdom, a myth, a symbol, a footnote. But this did not feel symbolic. It felt precise, deliberate, as if the word had been waiting centuries for his screen to display it. He tried to close the document. It resisted, not by force, but by indifference. The system responded as though there was nothing to close. The cursor froze again. Then the third line appeared. This book is not new. You are. His mind searched for explanations. Malware, hallucination, fatigue, stress. But explanations require comfort, and comfort was absent. What replaced it was alignment, a sense that events were no longer random but cued, lined up behind a curtain that had just lifted. The text continued, line by line, never rushing, never waiting. You live inside a version of reality that rewards obedience, repetition, and distraction. That version is not the only one. It is simply the loudest. He noticed then that the room felt quieter than it should have been, not silent, just muted, as if the world had stepped back to listen. The hum of electricity, The distant traffic, even his own breathing felt backgrounded, like noise reduced in an audio mix to highlight a single voice. You were trained to believe knowledge is accumulated. It is not. It is remembered. A pressure formed in his chest, not painful but expansive, like something unlocking. Memories surfaced that did not belong to any specific moment. Feelings of déjà vu without context. The sensation of having known something deeply and losing it slowly over time, one distraction at a time. The screen shifted. Symbols appeared now, flowing not left to right but inward, collapsing toward a center point that pulsed softly. He understood without being told. This was not language meant for eyes alone. It was structured to interact with cognition itself. This is the quantum book, the text said, not because it explains physics, but because it behaves like reality does when observed by a conscious mind. He reached out instinctively, fingers hovering above the keyboard, unsure what he was trying to touch. The symbols responded, rearranging themselves faster, glowing faintly as if acknowledging his attention. Those who are not ready see nothing. Those who are partially ready see symbols and call them fiction. Those who are ready feel recognition before understanding. Recognition. That was the word. He wasn't learning, he was recalling. Images flooded his awareness. Not visions, but compressions. Civilizations rising and falling, not through war, but through misalignment. Knowledge hidden not to protect the powerful, but to protect the unprepared. Teachers disappearing not because they were silenced, but because their presence disrupted unstable systems. The text paused, then delivered the sentence that changed everything. This book was written outside of time. You are reading it inside time. That difference matters. He realized then that the book was not being revealed all at once. It was synchronizing with him, adapting, measuring, the content adjusted to the reader's internal state, revealing only what could be integrated without collapse. This was not information, it was calibration. The room flickered, not visually but conceptually. The edges of objects felt less solid, less permanent. He remembered something he had once dismissed as a child, the idea that reality was more like a suggestion than a rule. You have been told that readiness is a choice, the book continued. It is not. Readiness is the result of pressure, loss, confusion, and unanswered questions accumulating until the old framework fails. His life replayed in fragments, moments where certainty dissolved, beliefs that stopped fitting, success that felt empty, failure that felt instructive. Every crack that had made him feel broken now revealed itself as preparation. The final line of the chapter appeared slowly, deliberately, as if to ensure it was not skimmed. If you ignore this, nothing bad will happen. That is the illusion. What you will miss is not punishment, it is alignment. The document closed itself. The room returned to normal sound levels. The pressure eased. The world felt solid again. But something irreversible had occurred. He knew now that reality had layers, and he had been granted access to one that did not announce itself loudly or beg for belief. That night the dream returned. This time the book opened. When the book opened in the dream, it did not reveal pages in the way books are supposed to. There was no flipping, no binding, no beginning or end. Instead, the space between his hands unfolded. The air itself became the surface. Symbols did not sit on it, they moved through it, passing into and out of existence like thoughts that hadn't decided whether to be conscious yet. He understood immediately that this was not imagination. Imagination borrows from memory. This was arriving from somewhere else. The dream did not feel like sleep. It felt like relocation. He was not unconscious. He was elsewhere. The first thing he noticed was that time behaved differently, not slower or faster, but optional. Moments did not replace each other. They stacked. He could sense multiple instants at once, like hearing several notes form a chord instead of a melody. Panic tried to surface and failed. Panic requires urgency, and urgency requires time to threaten you. Here, threat had nothing to attach itself to. The book responded before he formed a question. Your nervous system is adjusting, it conveyed, not in words, but in certainty. Fear is a biological reflex tuned for linear environments. This is not one. The symbols shifted, resolving briefly into structures that resembled diagrams and then dissolving again. Not explanations, but orientations. The sensation was similar to learning balance as a child, that moment when falling stopped being inevitable and became avoidable through alignment rather than effort. He realized that whatever this place was, it was not designed for instruction. It was designed for resonance. If something did not resonate, it simply did not appear. A presence emerged without form, not a figure, not a voice, not even a point in space, more like an intelligence defined by coherence rather than location. He did not ask if this was Thoth. The question felt irrelevant. Names belong to cultures. This presence existed before naming was useful. The understanding arrived cleanly and without drama. Thoth was not an individual. Thoth was a function, a role consciousness played when translating between layers of reality that could not directly communicate without distortion. You assume knowledge travels forward, the presence impressed upon him. It does not. It circulates, it condenses, it waits. The environment responded by revealing what looked like civilizations encoded as probability fields. Not cities, not people, but patterns of thought repeating across eras with slight variations. Every rise and collapse was not moral or accidental, but structural. When complexity outpaced coherence, systems fractured. When coherence was preserved, systems transcended. He saw something that unsettled him more than anything before. Humanity had reached this threshold multiple times. Each time, a subset of individuals had aligned early, stabilizing the transition. Each time they were labeled differently depending on the era. Priests, scribes, mystics, scientists, heretics. Their survival was never guaranteed, their role was never celebrated. But without them, the system reset entirely. The presence focused his awareness inward. You believe readiness is rare because intelligence is rare. This is incorrect. Readiness is rare because honesty is rare. Images surfaced of people confronting ideas that destabilized their identity and rejecting them instinctively, not because they were false, but because they required reconfiguration. The cost of understanding was not confusion, it was responsibility. The book pulsed gently. New structures appeared, this time more recognizable. Equations that behaved like sentences, symbols that acted like operators on perception itself. He understood then why the book could not be shared in conventional ways. Written language flattened it. Spoken language distorted it. Digital replication stripped it of context. The only way it functioned was interactively, adjusting to the internal architecture of the reader. This was not secrecy by exclusion. It was secrecy by incompatibility. You are not being taught, the presence clarified. You are being synchronized. He felt subtle shifts occur, like internal calibrations aligning, memories reorganized, priorities softened. Certain anxieties lost their grip not through reassurance but through irrelevance. He realized something unsettling and liberating at once. Most suffering was not caused by pain, but by misinterpretation of pain's signal. The dream space widened. He sensed other presences now, distant but real, not watching, not intruding, simply coexisting. Other readers, other receivers, spread across geography and time, unknowingly connected by readiness rather than ideology. There was no hierarchy among them, no leader, no doctrine. The only commonality was that their internal structures had cracked enough to let something else in. "You will be tempted to explain this," the presence warned. "Do not." He understood immediately. Explanation reduced resonance to argument. Argument triggered defense. Defense closed the very structures this work depended on. The knowledge protected itself, not by hiding, but by becoming inert when mishandled, like a quantum system collapsing under observation by the wrong instrument. The dream began to thin, not end, but loosen. Before it faded, one final compression entered him, dense and heavy with implication. The book does not change the world the presence conveyed. It changes readers. Readers change the probability of futures simply by existing differently. Then the environment folded inward, and he woke. Morning felt artificial, colors too sharp, sounds too specific. The linearity of events felt almost primitive, but the alignment remained. He moved through his day with an unfamiliar clarity, noticing patterns others missed, noticing pauses between words, hesitations, emotional lag. He could see where people reacted instead of responded, where identity filled gaps left by uncertainty. He tested something small, a conversation that normally escalated into defensiveness. He approached differently, not persuasive, not confrontational, simply present. The outcome shifted, not dramatically, subtly, enough to confirm that something fundamental had changed. The book was not active in his awareness anymore, but its effects were, like gravity, invisible yet structuring everything. That night, he did not dream of the book. He dreamed of choices branching silently, futures diverging without spectacle. He saw how tiny differences compounded, a word spoken or withheld, an assumption questioned or reinforced. The book had not given him answers. It had altered the questions he was capable of asking. On the third day after the dream, something unexpected happened. He encountered resistance, not external but internal, a creeping doubt that framed the experience as coincidence, a mental immune response attempting to restore the old equilibrium. He recognized it instantly for what it was: the system protecting itself, comfort reasserting control. The book had warned him this would happen. He did not fight the doubt. Fighting strengthened it. Instead, he observed it, letting it run its course, without urgency, without identification, and as he did, it weakened. Not because it was disproven, but because it was unnecessary. Certainty was not the goal. Coherence was. That evening the document returned. This time it did not appear suddenly. It emerged gradually, as if surfacing through layers of permission. The text was minimal. One line. Phase 2 requires embodiment. He understood. Until now the work had been internal, calibration, synchronization, but alignment without expression decayed. Knowledge unacted upon destabilized the system again. The book did not want believers, it wanted nodes. Humans who carried coherence into environments optimized for fragmentation. The realization carried weight. This was not a gift. It was a responsibility that could not be declined without consequence, not punishment, drift, the quiet suffering of knowing something mattered and choosing comfort anyway. Outside, the world continued exactly as before. News cycles, arguments, entertainment, distraction layered on distraction. Nothing visibly changed, and yet everything had. because he now understood something most people never articulated. The future was not approaching. It was being selected moment by moment through attention. He closed his eyes and felt the alignment settle deeper, like roots anchoring into unfamiliar soil. The book was no longer something he read. It was something he carried. And somewhere, beyond time, the circulation continued. Embodiment did not arrive as a command. It arrived as friction. The moment the idea settled inside him, the world began pushing back in small, precise ways, like a system testing structural integrity. Conversations felt heavier. Familiar routines lost their anesthetic effect. Even moments of rest carried an undercurrent of restlessness, not anxiety, but misalignment between who he had been performing as and what he now carried internally. The book had warned him without words: coherence cannot remain passive. It either expresses itself or collapses back into noise. The first manifestation was subtle but unmistakable. He began noticing when silence carried more information than speech. In meetings, in public spaces, in casual exchanges, he could sense the unspoken drivers behind words, the fears steering opinions, the need for validation masquerading as certainty. This awareness did not make him feel superior. It made him feel responsible. Seeing patterns meant becoming accountable for how he interacted with them. Ignorance had once offered plausible deniability. Alignment removed that luxury. He tested embodiment cautiously at first, not by teaching or correcting, but by altering his own presence. He slowed his responses, allowed pauses to exist without filling them, asked questions that did not lead, that did not corner, that simply opened space. The effect was immediate and disconcerting. People reacted as if something had interrupted their internal scripts. Some leaned in, others recoiled, a few grew irritated without knowing why. The book's logic revealed itself in real time. Coherence destabilized systems optimized for autopilot. Resistance intensified not because he was doing something wrong, but because he was doing something different. The more aligned he became, the more misalignment around him surfaced, not as opposition, but as discomfort. He realized then that most social harmony was maintained not by truth, but by shared avoidance. When one person stopped participating in the avoidance, the agreement fractured. The book returned intermittently, never intrusively, always contextually. Short compressions of understanding surfaced when needed, like internal annotations rather than external instructions. He understood that this was intentional. Dependency would have been a failure mode. The quantum book did not want followers, it wanted autonomous carriers of coherence capable of functioning without supervision. One night, as he walked alone through the city, he experienced something new, not a vision, but a shift in scale. The city did not feel like a collection of buildings and people. It felt like a cognitive organism. Infrastructure mirrored neural pathways, advertising mirrored intrusive thought patterns, traffic mirrored signal congestion. He saw how attention flowed, where it pooled, where it fragmented. The realization hit with quiet force: cities were not built around human needs. They were built around human predictability. You are beginning to see the interface the book impressed upon him. Do not confuse it with the system itself. The distinction mattered. Interfaces were adjustable. Systems resisted change. The work was not to fight the system head-on, but to introduce coherence into the interface until the system adapted or became obsolete. As his perception sharpened, so did the cost. Relationships strained. Some people sensed the change and interpreted it as judgment, even though none was present. Others tried to anchor him back into familiar roles, subtly reinforcing old identities. He recognized this not as malice but as self-preservation. When one element of a system changes, the system attempts to restore equilibrium. It did not matter whether the change was beneficial. Stability was the priority. Doubt resurfaced, more sophisticated this time. It wore the language of reason, coincidence, pattern-seeking bias, narrative construction. He allowed the doubt to speak fully, without suppression. The book had prepared him for this too. Doubt was not the enemy. Unexamined belief was. When the doubt finished its argument, something unexpected happened. It integrated. The experience did not diminish, it stabilized. The alignment deepened, now supported by scrutiny rather than threatened by it. Then came the second threshold. It arrived not in solitude but in contact. He met someone who was also aligned. There was no signal, no code word, no recognition ritual. The moment emerged naturally, hidden inside an ordinary interaction. A conversation about something trivial veered briefly into uncertainty. He responded without performance. The other person paused, eyes shifting in a way he now recognized. A micro-expression of recognition. Not agreement, recognition. The air between them changed, not emotionally but structurally. The conversation slowed, deepened, stripped of filler. They did not exchange experiences. They did not mention books or visions. They did not need to. The coherence was mutual, and that was enough. When they parted, no contact information exchanged, he felt a resonance linger, like two tuning forks briefly brought into alignment. Later that night, the book surfaced again, more present than it had been in weeks. Nodes are forming, it conveyed, not by organization but by probability. He understood immediately. There would be no movement, no group, no ideology. Anything that could be named could be co-opted, attacked, diluted. The network would remain implicit, invisible to those not already aligned. With this realization came a heavier implication. Alignment was not inherently benevolent. Coherence amplified intention. If carried by someone unexamined, it could just as easily reinforce control as dismantle it. The ancient warnings made sense now. Knowledge arriving before ethical integration did not liberate civilizations, it destabilized them catastrophically. He became more careful, not fearful, precise. He paid attention to his internal state before speaking, before acting. The book did not ask him to withdraw from the world. It asked him to engage without distortion. That distinction required constant awareness. Alignment was not a permanent state. It was a practice. The third dream arrived without warning. This one was different. There was no book, there was no presence. There was only a landscape that felt unfinished. Structures rose and dissolved in the distance, half-formed realities competing for stability. He sensed that these were futures, not predictions, but potential configurations dependent on collective coherence. Some were efficient but brittle. Others were chaotic but adaptable. A few shimmered with a quality he struggled to name, something like resilience without rigidity. He understood then that the work extended far beyond personal transformation. The book was not preparing individuals for enlightenment. It was preparing reality for transition. A shift not in technology, but in how consciousness interfaced with it. The future would not be determined by intelligence or power, but by coherence under complexity. A choice presented itself without ceremony. Remain a quiet carrier, influencing subtly, locally, anonymously, or move closer to articulation, risk misinterpretation, become visible enough to attract distortion. Neither was framed as right or wrong, only consequential. He woke before choosing. The following days forced the decision. Circumstances converged. Opportunities arose that required him to speak more clearly, to articulate ideas that challenged existing assumptions. He felt the risk immediately. Words were blunt instruments. They collapsed nuance. But silence now felt like avoidance rather than humility. He chose a middle path. He spoke, but not in conclusions. He framed questions. He introduced uncertainty where false certainty reigned. He refused to simplify what could not be simplified honestly. The response was polarized. Some dismissed him. Some resonated deeply. A few became uncomfortable enough to react aggressively, defending frameworks they had never consciously examined. The book did not intervene. This was embodiment. This was the cost. One evening, after a particularly draining exchange, he felt the alignment waver. Fatigue opened cracks. Old habits beckoned. It would have been easy to retreat, to rationalize disengagement as wisdom. In that moment, the book returned one final time, not with instruction, but with context. Alignment is not comfort, it impressed. It is integrity under pressure. He understood then what Thoth truly represented. Not a god of knowledge, but a guardian of translation. A function that ensured coherence, survived transitions between states that would otherwise fragment consciousness entirely. The world was approaching such a transition. Not an apocalypse, not a revelation, a compression. Information density increasing faster than meaning could stabilize. Systems accelerating beyond ethical integration. Humans augmented technologically without equivalent internal alignment. The result was predictable: fragmentation, polarization, loss of shared reality. The book was a counterweight, not to stop the process but to guide it through a narrow corridor of coherence where collapse was not inevitable. He exhaled slowly, feeling the weight settle without crushing him. This was not about saving the world. That framing was still rooted in ego. This was about participating responsibly in a process already underway. Somewhere, others were doing the same. Not coordinated, not united, aligned. And that, the book knew, was enough. The compression did not announce itself with catastrophe. That was the final deception humanity had inherited from its own stories. There was no singular day, no sky tearing open, no undeniable signal that forced consensus. The compression arrived the way pressure always does, gradually, invisibly, until structures failed not because they were attacked, but because they were never designed to hold that much weight. The man felt it first as acceleration without direction. Everything moved faster, yet nothing progressed. Information multiplied while understanding thinned. Arguments recycled. Identities hardened. The world did not feel like it was ending. It felt like it was repeating itself more loudly each time. He noticed how people reacted to uncertainty now, not with curiosity but with aggression, not with humility but with performance. Opinions were no longer tools for navigation, they were armor. The book had shown him this phase before, not as prophecy but as pattern. When meaning lags behind complexity, humans cling to certainty even when it is false, because false certainty still provides orientation. This was the dangerous moment, not collapse but rigidity. Systems that cannot bend do not survive pressure. They shatter. Embodiment reached its final test when the man realized there would be no further guidance. The book had gone quiet, not absent but complete. What remained was not instruction but responsibility. He understood now why Thoth had never been a teacher in the traditional sense. Teaching implied hierarchy. This process required equivalence. The moment he looked for authority, he would regress. The quantum book was never meant to be followed. It was meant to be absorbed until it disappeared. He felt the network more clearly now, not as voices or messages, but as probability shifts. Moments where events aligned too cleanly to dismiss. Encounters that carried disproportionate consequence. People who crossed his path briefly and altered trajectories without realizing it. None of them spoke of the book. None of them needed to. The work was not shared through language, it propagated through behavior, through presence, through choices that introduced coherence into unstable environments. The final choice arrived quietly, disguised as an opportunity, a platform, visibility, the chance to articulate ideas at scale. This was the fork the book had prepared him for without ever naming it. Visibility increased reach, but also distortion. Language at scale attracted those seeking certainty, identity, and authority. The risk was not opposition. The risk was becoming a symbol. Symbols simplify. Simplification would betray the work. He did not refuse the opportunity. He reframed it. He spoke without declaring truth. He refused to offer conclusions. He dismantled false binaries without replacing them with new dogmas. He left gaps deliberately, trusting that only those ready would tolerate ambiguity without filling it with projection. Many turned away. Some mocked. A few leaned forward, unsettled but attentive. That was enough. The compression intensified globally, not in headlines but in tone. Conversations felt brittle. Humor sharpened into cruelty. Algorithms amplified outrage because outrage was easy to predict. The man saw how systems optimized for engagement inevitably destabilized meaning, not because they were evil, but because they were efficient without wisdom. The ancient mistake repeated itself in digital form, capability without coherence. Then came the moment he had not anticipated, not a vision, not a message, but a profound stillness. In the middle of a crowded city, surrounded by motion and noise, he felt a sudden internal quiet so complete it bordered on absence. Not peace, clarity, the kind that does not soothe but stabilizes. In that stillness, he understood the final truth the book had been building toward without ever stating. There would be no awakening event, no mass realization, no collective enlightenment. That narrative was another comfort story. The transition would occur unevenly, asymmetrically, carried by individuals whose internal coherence altered local probabilities just enough to prevent total fragmentation. Not heroes, not leaders, stewards, quiet stabilizers embedded within the noise. The future would not be chosen by consensus, but by accumulation of small, aligned acts that prevented collapse at critical thresholds. He saw now why the book revealed itself only to the ready, not because others were unworthy, but because readiness included the willingness to act without recognition, to carry responsibility without reward, to remain grounded when certainty was unavailable. This was not mystical elitism, it was functional necessity. The final confirmation arrived in the most ordinary way possible. A conversation. A question asked sincerely, a pause held without discomfort, a moment where someone else experienced the same subtle shift he once had, the hesitation in time, the crack in the frame rate of reality. He did not name it, he did not explain, he simply remained present. That was enough to allow the other person to notice what had always been there. Later, alone, he reflected on the irony. The quantum book written by Thoth had never been a book at all. It was a process, a filter, a self-selecting transmission that only stabilized within minds capable of holding paradox without collapse. Written outside time not because it predicted the future, but because it operated on principles that did not depend on era, technology, or culture. He realized then that the title itself had been the final test. If you ignore this, you'll miss Thoth's quantum book written only for the ready. It was never a threat, it was a description. Ignoring it carried no punishment. Missing it changed nothing externally. But internally it preserved alignment with a version of reality that would grow increasingly unstable under pressure. The compression reached its peak quietly. Systems failed softly. Some dissolved, others adapted. There was loss, there was confusion, but there was not total collapse. Not because humanity had united, but because enough individuals had learned to carry coherence without needing permission. The man never saw the book again. He did not need to. It had completed its function, and somewhere beyond naming and time, the circulation continued, not as scripture, not as doctrine, but as readiness recognizing itself when the moment arrived. The story ends here not because the process stopped, but because it no longer needs to be narrated. If you reach this point, the book has already done its work. Whether you carry it forward is no longer part of the story. It is part of you.